Hey guys, it's Sharon from Woodshop Diaries, and after hundreds of requests in this video, I'm finally sharing how to build a corner base cabinet. So I'm in the process of reworking our walk-in pantry, and the space is not actually ready yet, but I'm slowly building the cabinets and the pieces that I want to put in it once it is. Since I've had so many requests for corner cabinets and there are several different styles of them, I thought I would build a few for the pantry and share them with you all. This is one of 3 corner cabinet styles that I'll be sharing in the coming months, so if this isn't the one you're looking for, stay tuned, there is more. For now, if you're ready to dive in and build a basic corner base cabinet, let's go. If you haven't already checked out my basic base cabinet video, a lot of helpful tips and additional information about just general cabinet building is already covered over there, so I encourage you to go give it a watch. Anyway, like my other cabinets, I started this build by cutting down the plywood. I used birch plywood for this project, and the full cut list can be found in the printable plans. From my first sheet, I ripped a strip off the bottom and then set it to the side. This will be the back corner piece of the cabinet, but we will come back to this later. From the remaining sheet, I cut down 2 side panels and 2 back panels. The side panels will be the pieces that butt against the adjacent base cabinets once installed. So on the bottom front corners, I marked and notched out a toe kick, which is the same size and shape that I do for regular base cabinets. That way they'll match. Then I brought out a second sheet of plywood to cut the bottom panel from. Now this bottom panel has a bit more going on with it. So after I trimmed the plywood to the overall size that I needed it to be, I marked out where it will need to be cut for the front corner and the back corner. I cut the front corner out about a 12-inch square, but the back corner gets cut diagonally. In case you're wondering, it's pretty common for corner cabinets to have this back corner kind of chopped off. It could totally be for a completely different reason than this, but I assume it's because most drywall corners aren't square, so cutting this out makes it much easier to install since the corners don't have to fit perfectly together. Anyway, after the bottom was cut, I cut a few strips for the top supports and the toe kick supports, then I was ready to start putting it all together. I assembled this cabinet using pocket holes and screws, but of course there are plenty of other ways to assemble, so feel free to use whatever method that you prefer. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure there's a good way to assemble this. The pieces are large and awkwardly shaped and kind of just hard to keep balanced. So I just kind of struggled through it. I will say that I actually don't recommend installing the toe kick pieces along the bottom yet, so just ignore that. Once the sides were attached to the bottom, I added the back panels on each side. Then I flipped it over and secured the bottom to these back panels as well. At this point, I added the top support strips and this is where I recommend attaching the toe kick supports. So just like how the top has kind of like a T-brace, the bottom needs a T-brace, but I installed the long part when I was installing the bottom and all of that, but the short piece I cut too short. I wasn't taking into consideration the toe kick when I cut it the same length as the top piece, but that's wrong. It needs to be longer. All right, so I have a new piece cut the correct length. One thing I wanted to make a quick note about here is that these are like the toe kick backers. So the toe kick piece will go across the front of all of the cabinets once they're installed. So like you'll have another cabinet that will go on this side of the corner cabinet and then another one on that side. And once all the cabinets are installed, you'll cut a piece to run across the front of all of them. So these pieces will be covered. I'm just putting them here, one, to support the bottom since it's kind of big and oddly shaped. But also, especially at this corner here, like when the toe kick is in place, it needs somewhere to nail to. So like you're gonna need something here in this corner to be able to nail the toe kick to. Now the cabinet box itself is complete except for the back panel. So the back panel has to be cut so that the two edges are beveled at 45 degrees. So I set up my circular saw in a straight edge to rip a bevel down one end. Then I measured and marked how wide to cut it, and I cut the other end. The problem is that it matters what direction this bevel goes, and I did not cut it the right way. This was supposed to be turned. See this? Don't do this. Not gonna lie, I just glued the cut end back on. This will not be super pretty at the joint, but that is okay. This is my cabinet and it's the back of the cabinet. Once it dries, I'll cut it down. This was correct. Once I had my back angled panel cut correctly, now I installed it between the two back panels with a few screws. I also added a couple of screws through the bottom panel as well. Now I needed to add the face frame. So I built my face frame from 1x2 pre-primed pine boards because I was planning to paint it. I've mentioned this I feel like 100 times before, but on these thin and narrow boards, I like to use the Craig Micro pocket hole jig with the smaller panhead pocket hole screws. The smaller holes and screws are just less likely to split the wood. I had already drilled pocket holes in the bottom and sides to attach the face frame, but I forgot that I needed to also drill a couple in the top supports as well. I clamped the face frame to the cabinet and then screwed it on with pocket hole screws. Now you don't have to use pocket holes to install the face frame. You could use wood glue and nails or screws from the front side and just fill them. This is a learning process. I wasn't thinking about the fact that like these are not really accessible because of the toe kick piece. So I took this piece out to screw in these two pocket holes, but then I realized like I could just drill, since these aren't going to be exposed once it's installed and the actual toe kick is in place, I'm just going to drill like an access hole here to get the bit up into so I don't have to take this piece out. So I actually meant to glue the face frame in addition to the screws, but there are plenty of screws. I don't think that the face frame is going anywhere, so I'm not really concerned about it. If I did it again, I would have added some glue. Now the corner cabinet box is finished and it's time to figure out what to put inside. So the L-shaped cabinet box is pretty standard, but what goes inside is not really a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. Corner cabinets can have drawers. You would need to run some braces between the front and the back to mount the slides to, and then build your boxes in a way that the front is kind of like a V shape. It's a lot of wasted space, but it is an option. A more common option is adding a Lazy Susan. So Lazy Susans for corner cabinets like these come in 3 basic styles. You have the 2-tier kind that mount on a pole, kind of something like this. These install into the cabinet so that the pole runs from the top to the bottom and the shelves just kind of rotate around it. In this case, you don't need any kind of extra shelving. That would just be in the way. And then you have a similar style called a pie cut Lazy Susan, where it's the same thing. You have 2 tiers on a pole, but the doors mount directly to the Lazy Susan. So when you spin it, the doors go inside the cabinet. In that case, you also wouldn't need a shelf, but that's only an option with inset doors. And then you have what's called a kidney style Lazy Susan, where you just have the Lazy Susan and the hardware on the bottom, and it just mounts directly to the cabinet bottom and or to a shelf that you install into the cabinet. Or you can just skip the Lazy Susans altogether and have a cabinet with a simple shelf. It's really up to you, but whatever you do decide to put inside of here, I recommend putting it in before you add the countertop, because once the counter is in place, it's going to be difficult to get much of anything into this small opening in the front. A shelf is an easy add with some shelf pins, but it's completely optional. In my case, I kind of hate Lazy Susans, so I really just wanted a shelf in here. So I drilled shelf pin holes into the 2 side panels and in the back angled piece to place my shelf pins. Then I carefully measured and cut to fit a piece of plywood for my shelf. Now this piece is very similar to the bottom panel shape, but it's a little smaller, so I found it easiest to kind of measure the inside of my cabinet and cut the shelf to fit. The shelf fits, but now I need to get it out and edge band the front edges here and sand it, and then I can put it in with shelf pins. After I made sure that it would fit, I edge banded the front edges of the shelf and set the cabinet to the side while I worked on the doors. I won't go into super detail about how I assembled my doors because I have a whole separate video on 7 ways to build a cabinet door. In case you're wondering, for this cabinet I used method number 4 from that video. But once the doors were assembled, I primed and painted them and the face frame of the cabinet, and then they were ready to install. For this type of cabinet, you need 2 pair of hinges. You'll have 1 pair of hinges that connect the 2 doors together, and then you have 1 pair of hinges that attaches the door to the cabinet. Now, because of the shape, you need these doors to be able to open wider than normal, or else it's going to be difficult to get into. In this case, I'm using concealed hinges to mount the doors, but you don't have to. You could also use like a piano hinge or a butt hinge. I just prefer these. Typically, you want these 135-degree cabinet hinges to connect the doors together, and then you'll use these 165-degree hinges, or sometimes they're 170-degree hinges, either works, for attaching the cabinet door to the cabinet. I drilled 4 hinge cup holes in one of my doors and installed the 165-degree hinges on the side that will mount to the cabinet. Then I added the 135-degree hinges and the second door on the other side. Okay, so I just used these corner clamps that I have. A scrap piece of wood would work fine. I just lined up the corners of the doors so that they're flush on both sides. I built these doors to be 1¼ inch overlay the face frame, but I searched all over the internet and I couldn't find any 165-degree hinges with a overlay bigger than 3/4. And after looking a little closer, I believe it's because these particular hinges are intended for use with either frameless or face frame cabinets. Since the max overlay on a frameless cabinet is 3/4 inch, the fact that I couldn't find anything bigger than 3/4 inch now makes sense. So in order to get my 1¼ inch overlay, I'm gonna have to notch into the face frame. Since my desired overlay is 1¼ inches and the hinge gives me 3/4 inches, I need to notch into the face frame the difference, which is a 1/2 inch. I held up my door on the face frame and marked where the hinges hit the frame so that way I knew where to notch. Then I used a jigsaw to carefully cut out these notches. You could also use a router or an oscillating tool to notch this out. In hindsight, I should have notched these out before I painted, but it is what it is. Alright, well the tape pulled off a little paint because I literally just painted it yesterday and I should have let this cure longer before I taped it, but I'll touch that up. Now we can mount the doors. So with overlay doors, you can see there's a gap here where the door is not actually completely flush against the cabinet. But over here, there's nothing to there's no hinge or anything. So the door's just sitting flat against the cabinet. So I'm gonna use one of these little bumpers. These just peel off and stick onto the back of the door. That way it bumps it out a little and it keeps it from rubbing, but then it also evens out the gaps. And with that, this corner cabinet is ready to eventually go into my pantry. Corner cabinets are simple to build, but they just have a lot of possibilities and options to think about and consider. I hope you enjoyed seeing this one come together, and I hope it gave you some ideas to apply to building your own. Don't forget, I'll be sharing 2 more corner cabinet styles soon, so if you're not already subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss seeing those and all of the other projects coming soon. Thanks so much for watching, friends, and until next time, happy building!